Welcome, everyone. I'm Robert Reeves, and I did not attend the thesis session last week, and I heard there was some concern that I had been pushed aside, kicked to the curb, and I just wanted you to know that I am still here, and as we grow, I am spending a lot of time trying to prepare a safe place for us on main campus so they will continue supporting this wonderful mission. And we are growing, and I think it's a good use of my time, and time will tell. But we're very excited to have all the new leadership with Julie as MFA director, with Nick Magano heading the theater and film, with Luann Walker increasing our publishing component, and also beginning this summer, visual arts, as you know about, with Scott Sandell leading that effort. So. Another good thing, on Monday we had our first reading in Manhattan, and you may have heard that was a fabulous evening with Dan Menaker and Elizabeth Strout. And we are beginning this evening the series that we all care about, that is now so ably curated by an associate editor of Southampton Review and new faculty member, Susie Merrell. Susie.
Seems like we just left here. Here we are again. Welcome. I wanted to remind you that next week on the 22nd, we'll have Michael Schneerson and David Margolick, and they'll be talking about the art of literary biography. And they will, if you come, tell you about the importance of the money chapter. So that's something you can all learn about. If you don't know already, you can find us on Facebook at Writers Speak Wednesday. You can follow us on Twitter at Writers Speak Wednesday. And if you need more information about any of the people who are going to be speaking this semester, that's probably the best place to get it. We have a tradition here of letting our readers' work speak for itself, but I'm just utterly thrilled to have Helen Schulman here, who is one of the first people I ever met as a semi-pro writer, and she'll be reading from her extraordinary novel, This Beautiful Life.
So I'm so happy to be here. I actually haven't seen Susie. I think we decided it was 25 years when we just met again, and I'm so happy to have been asked. I'm going to read a little bit from the prologue first, and that'll help set up the major part of my reading. Okay. Her mouth filled the screen. Purple lip gloss, clear braces. Still think I'm too young? She leaned over, the fixed lens of the camera catching a tiny smattering of blemishes on her cheek like a comet's spray. Her hair had been bleached white with long blonde roots, and most of it was pulled back and up into a chunky ponytail above the 3 plastic hoops climbing the rim of her ear. The song began to play, Beyoncé, I Love to Love You, Baby. She stepped aside, revealing her room in all its messy glory. Above the bed was a painting. The central image was a daisy. Thank you. A large lava lamp bubbled and gooed on the nightstand. She was giggling off stage. Suddenly the screen was a swirl of green plaid, film strips of color in knife pleats. Her short skirt swayed along with her round hips. A little roll of ivory fat nestled above the waistband. She wore a white tank top, which she took off, her hands quickly finding the cups of her black bra. The breasts inside were small, and at first she covered them with her palms, fingers splayed like scallop shells. Then she unhooked the bra in the front, and they popped out as if on springs. Her hands did a little fan dance as they reached below her hemline and lifted up her skirt. She'd done all of this for his benefit, to please him, to prove him wrong. She reached out for the little toy baseball bat, and the next part was hard to watch, even if you knew what was coming, except it wasn't. So that prologue is about a girl named Daisy who's 13 and a half, and she makes this sex video for a boy named Jake who she likes, who's 15 and a half, and she sends it to him. And when he gets it in his inbox, he gets it by email, he's so blown away and proud and scared and whatever. It's like a hot potato. He presses forward and sends it to his friend Luke. And then Luke sends it to 2 friends, and they send it to their friends from camp, and by the end of the weekend, it's gone viral. It's all over the world. There's no bringing it back. And that's the main action, or I guess the inciting incident of my novel. And the bulk of my reading is going to take place about 2/3 of the way through the book, and it's Jake. After this has happened, his whole world kind of collapses, and he's suspended from school, and many things happen, including his father gets him reinstated in school by doing a lot of things that maybe you wouldn't want to have to do. And so we're going to pick up his first day back at school. He goes to school in Riverdale, in the city, at a fancy private school. What you should know is that the girl he loves is named Audrey, and she's Luke, his best friend's girlfriend. Okay. On Friday, Rachel Potter asked Jake out. Rachel Potter was one of the hottest girls in his grade and one of the most popular. She had all this great curly blonde hair. She came up behind Jake as he was crossing campus on his way to the gym. "Hey, Jake," said Rachel, her hair singing in a cloud above her shoulders, like each spiral was a voice in a chorus. She was wearing a little flouncy blue miniskirt, a filmy white blouse, bare legs, and boots. He was surprised she knew his name, except now everyone did, so he wasn't. He was formerly surprised in the moment, not now. "Hey, Rachel," said Jake. She walked alongside him. "It really sucked what Daisy did to you," said Rachel. She smiled at him as they walked down the brick path across the grass. "I mean, you didn't ask for it, did you?" Rachel said. She kind of leaned into him when she asked the question, and he noticed that her eyes were very, very blue, almost as if there were holes in her head, and he was seeing the sky behind her. "No," said Jake, "I didn't ask for it." "But did you like it?" said Rachel. Did he like it? This was never a question anyone had asked him before. Not his parents, not his friends, the school principal, his lawyers. He'd been surprised by it, he'd been shocked by it, he'd been excited by it. When he'd first seen it, it felt like icy water, really icy water with actual shards of ice in it, had been coursing through his veins, so cold and spiky. He'd gotten hard, he'd gotten proud, he'd been appalled, scared, he'd wanted to show off. "I don't know," said Jake. "I like to dance," said Rachel. She looked him in the eyes when she said that. Jake's cheeks flushed hot. "You're so cute, Jake," said Rachel. "You're blushing." "I am not," said Jake, but he was. He could feel the rising heat. "Okay," said Rachel, "you're not," but she was smiling. Part of the agreement his lawyers had negotiated with the school was that his parents promised to put him into therapy. His mom had made his first shrink appointment. It was for Wednesday after basketball practice, and his mom, looking up from her computer, had said that maybe he might enjoy it. She said she herself had liked going to a shrink, which she did back in the day before she'd married his father. "I don't want him to think of it as punitive," Jake heard her whisper to his father, who didn't seem to care if Jake saw it as punitive or not. On Monday, Jake saw Luke's girlfriend, Audrey, the girl Jake liked down the hall, the back of her, that tiny butt, those tight black jeans, those magical gold slippers. He started to walk faster to catch up with her when he saw Luke turn the corner. Audrey took one look at Luke and turned the other way. "Come on, Aud," said Luke. He started going after her. Jake hadn't seen Luke since they both came back from suspension. He was afraid to see Luke, and he didn't want Luke to see him. So Jake hung back in the hallway, taking a step or two in reverse when Rachel Potter caught his elbow with her hand. "You're going the wrong way, Jake," said Rachel. She slid her hand down his arm and crooked her elbow in the hook of his elbow. "You've got math now, right?" "How do you know?" said Jake. "Come on, I'll escort you," said Rachel. She started walking him forward. "I looked up your schedule online." "Why'd you do that?" said Jake. "Because I like you," said Rachel. Those clear blue eyes again, depthless. That blonde curly hair tied back in a knot at the base of her neck. She liked him. As they walked down the hall, Jake saw Luke coming towards them. "Fuck you," Luke said to Jake. "You're a total fucking asshole." Jake stopped in his tracks for a second. He hated Luke. There was no denying his beauty, with his pink cheeks and glowing blue eyes, his blonde hair and yellow stubble. Luke took a step in closer to Jake. His breath smelled bad, like tobacco and coffee. He got up in his face. "You should drop out of school, dude, I'm telling you. We could have gone to jail because of you. You should fucking drop out." Jake could feel Rachel's fingers tighten around his arm. "I should fuck you up," Luke said, stroking his own chin. "All the chicks in the world with a jaw like that." A crowd was beginning to gather. Jake didn't know whether to flee or fight. He just stood there dumbly, breathing heavily. He wondered if he were having a heart attack or a stroke, a seizure. Was he having an out-of-body experience and entering the ether? He didn't know. "Do you assholes want to get expelled?" whispered this James kid. He sailed right past them. "You'll get everyone in trouble." "Come on, Jake," said Rachel. She tugged Jake away, Luke hissing after him. "You can run, but you can't hide," Luke said. "Come on," she said. They went outside and into the woods. Wednesday he had his first shrink session. Although Jake arrived by himself, his mom was waiting for him in the waiting room to pick him up when the 45-minute hour was over, like he was a tiny kid or terminally ill or just a prisoner, like he was a little pet goat. Friday after school, Jake finally saw Audrey. That is, he spoke to her. He'd stayed late in the library so he could avoid people. He was supposedly studying, but his attention consistently wandered off. He kept thinking about dinosaurs, just like when he was little. For some reason, he kept thinking about the stegosaurus with a brain the size of a meatball. How could something with so large a body have such a tiny head? How could its plates not have been attached to its bone? In what direction had they truly pointed? It was impossible to empty his mind enough to study. When Jake tried, it quickly filled with other, more awful stuff. How he felt, what it was like to live at home, the way his parents now seemed to him like strangers, dishonor, ignominy, lonesomeness, the overriding desire to blame everyone else for his own conduct. Did he even want to go on this way, being this kind of guy, the kind of guy that did the things he'd done? He'd rather be a boy who thought about dinosaurs. It was about 6 o'clock when Jake looked up at the clock and realized that he'd gotten nothing accomplished. Exam week started Monday. Oh well, maybe he'd just flunk out. He decided to grab his books and make his way home. She was sitting outside the library, Audrey, smoking a cigarette even though she was on school property and she was sitting by herself. On a marble bench donated by some class of something, were the parents of a kid who died in a traffic accident or in a war. The bench was so pretty, and so was Audrey. She looked like a Chinese character from the back, perched upon it that way. The slim lines of her sleek black hair, her all-black outfit, the black jeans and the tight black t-shirt, all precise little brush strokes. And then there were those gold slippers, the smoky gray veil of her cigarette smoke, the red ember like watercolor. "Hey, Audrey," Jake said. She turned her head up and to the right to see him. "Sup, Jake," said Audrey, squinting into the light. "Do you mind if I sit down?" Jake said. "Free country," said Audrey. She turned back to look in the same direction she'd been looking in before he came and disturbed her. Jake sat down next to her. He dropped his backpack down next to his feet. He stared at the tops of his sneakers. He looked over at her knees, her thighs, even as narrow as they were, they fanned out a little pressed against the marble. Jake wanted more than anything to bury his face into her lap, but he didn't. Instead, he raised his gaze. She was so gorgeous in a boy-like way. Her eyes, her nose, her beautiful mouth, so totally elegantly balanced. She inhaled again, then tipped her neck back, exposing her long golden throat, and exhaled up into the sky, so the smoke would not get into his eyes. "I'm sorry," said Jake. "Why are you apologizing to me?" said Audrey. "That's kind of funny." "What do you mean?" said Jake. "Well, it's Daisy's life you destroyed, not mine," said Audrey. "I didn't mean to," said Jake. "I didn't ask her to do it or send it to me." "Who cares?" said Audrey. "We don't ask for a lot of things." There was silence for a while. His mind reeled. He didn't know how to express himself or how to reach her. She took a last drag and dropped the cigarette into the thick green grass and ground it out with her foot. Then she picked up the butt and put it into the pocket of her black sweatshirt. She was shivering, but it wasn't cold, and she didn't put the sweatshirt on. Instead, she crossed her legs in a half lotus up on the bench. She looked Jake in the eye. Hers were inky black, and she'd lined them with black liner. Lashes, eyeliner, iris, all the same color. Her teeth seemed to chatter a little. "You're cold," said Jake. He picked up her sweatshirt off the ground and offered it to her. It was 70 degrees out. "Do you have any idea how hard it is to be a girl?" said Audrey, legs crossed, teeth chattering, ignoring his outstretched hand. "Yeah," said Jake, "I know. The double standard, do you mean? Like empowerment and stuff?" He brought her sweatshirt into his lap. It was soft. He petted it like a small animal. Audrey reached down into her bag. It was black suede and had long black fringes with black beads threaded on them. It looked vintage, like she'd either spent a lot of money on it or found it in a shop in Brooklyn. She snaked her golden arm into the bag and brought out a pack of Marlboros. She opened it and shook out a cigarette and a lighter. She pressed down on the little pedal of the lighter and lit up. Audrey inhaled deeply, and it was as if her body was a balloon and the smoke lifted her. Like helium, it raised her to her feet. Standing, her t-shirt rose, and he saw the gold ring piercing her navel. It winked at him for a second before she exhaled and the t-shirt came back down. Audrey stared off at a stand of trees. "You are just an idiot boy," said Audrey. "You are all just idiot boys. Someday I'll be old and ugly and no one will want to fuck me, and I won't have to deal with any of you any longer." "I'm really looking forward to that," said Audrey. Then she picked up her sweatshirt and tied it around her tiny waist. Like the sleeves were a black velvet ribbon, and Audrey herself was a package, a little precious gift. She slung that cool bag over her shoulder and she started walking. She started walking away from Jake and all the idiot boys, walking away from the prison of her youth and beauty and into the hard-fought-for loneliness of her future. Audrey walked away from Jake down the path toward the stone gates of the school, and there was nothing he could do to stop her. Or if there was, he was clueless. Jake didn't talk about any of that with the shrink on Wednesday. He spent the morning taking his chem final, and he pretty much talked about how hard it was and how scared he'd been. But at the end of the day, he was feeling pretty confident. Bizarrely confident were the words he used with the shrink. Here Jake's voice ran out. "Anne," said the shrink, "what are you thinking, Jake?" "I should have been thrown out of school," said Jake. "Should have," said the shrink, "because of the email?" Jake nodded, his eyes filling with tears. "I'm not so sure I agree with you," said the shrink, "and the point is you weren't thrown out of school, so the school didn't agree with you either." "I wasn't thrown out because of my dad," said Jake. "The strings he pulled. Everything is because of my dad. It's like he's some kind of superhero, and I'm just like this sex offender, plus a fucking cripple." "That's interesting," said the shrink, the skin around his eyes crinkling, indicating amusement. "Let's talk about that next week," said the shrink. And they did. The shrink seemed to like to talk about Jake's father, and Jake wanted the shrink to feel successful. What they didn't talk about was Audrey. Audrey walking away from youth and beauty and sex and boys like him. Audrey eager to be old and ugly and alone. And they didn't talk about Rachel, about how that Friday after Luke had cursed him out, when they'd gone together into the woods behind their school, Rachel had knelt down in the dirt and leaves and sticks on her own bare knees and took his dick in her mouth. About how blue and luminous her eyes were as she looked up at Jake while she sucked him off. Or about how he'd taken her head in his hands and moved it, gently at first and then roughly back and forth around his dick until finally he didn't care at all any more about Audrey or Rachel or anything else but how he felt. And he grabbed her head and he pushed it back and forth as hard as he liked it, so hard it seemed that he might hurt her neck or that Rachel might even choke. She seemed to gag a little, but Jake didn't care. He didn't care and he didn't stop, even when she put up a hand to slow him down or maybe even to push him back. It was like he was jerking himself off in Rachel's mouth, and when he looked down, her eyes were half closed. He could no longer see any of that crazy blue, just white. And then his dick slipped out of her mouth, and she gasped for air, and he came on Rachel's face, shooting across her cheek, some of it landing behind her ear in her beautiful angel hair. Jake sort of hated her then, even later too, when she smiled at him. Thank you.
I'll start out.
Okay.
I had three different questions that I wanted to ask you, that I came here thinking I wanted to ask you, but what I really want to ask you about, having listened to that scene, is pacing and how you, that was very clearly a scene, and it was paced in a very particular and careful way, it seems to me, and I wonder how conscious your pacing is as you write.
That was a very hard scene to write,
I bet.
and not so much fun to read either. Sometimes it's hard. But I think it's a crucial moment in the character's development, because I think it's a moment where he is so overwhelmed by the actions around him and by his own weakness and his own response and what's happened, that he begins to buy into this view of himself as a predator and as a cripple, and he kind of loses his humanity. And it was very hard for me to write. In fact, when I first wrote the book, I sent it to my agent, who I'm very close to, but we're very different. He's very buttoned down, kind of southern and waspy, and I'm the opposite. And he called me on the phone, he goes, "It's just a blowjob." And I was like so amazed that he talked to me that. But it really took a lot to get to the point where I felt enough was happening in that scene to justify it, because I think you have to justify that kind of sexual thing so it doesn't feel gratuitous, and I wanted it to have meaning. So I began to intersperse it with the things with the family, right? With his mother and with this girl that he loved and the shrink. And it was only by sort of dancing in and out that I could get to that final scene. I think if I had just gone straight to it, if he had just gone back to school and hooked up with Rachel, perhaps you wouldn't have, well, I hope that you also see his humanity and the tragedy that's befallen him, because I care about him so much.
Yeah.
So I don't know if that answers it.
So you were writing to that moment.
It grew out. It grows out sideways. It wasn't like I had a grand master plan.
Mm-hmm.
But once I had that moment and I knew I wasn't making it work, I had to work, I guess, eventually towards it. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I think, I think sometimes with the fiction, you want to have other things around it, right? So you don't feel like you're just hitting people over the head with that moment. And then you can get a lot of other complexity, and that's quieter.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's very helpful. Yeah. I'm just going to ask one more, and then I'll let you guys ask questions. The other question that I think I mentioned to you that I would love to know about how it is that you select your material so that you're always like 1 minute away from a news item. I mean, A Day at the Beach basically came out. It seemed like it came out the day after 9/11, and it's about 9/11, and and this the same way seems to really. I mean, how are you looking for your material?
I mean, that's like a new evolution in those last two books. Mm-hmm. But I think with A Day at the Beach, the funny thing was funny. It's not funny. Nothing about 9/11 is funny. But after we were getting over our absolute initial horror and shock, I live in the city. I always have. I remember at one point saying to my husband, so much bad art is going to come out of this. And then the next thing I did was write this. But what happened to me was that it eclipsed absolutely everything else. And I also, in a way, it gave me a way to write about the things that I was thinking about, and a lot of it had to do with the changes that have happened in this country and in the world, and the redistribution of wealth, or the fact that wealth has, the 1%, the 99%, all of that, which is new language for what I was thinking about. So I had been writing a little bit about the Hamptons, actually. My mother has a house in Amagansett, and I really wasn't getting anywhere. And then I had heard some different anecdotes from people I knew who, everybody kept saying, where were you? Where were you that day? And several people I know had escaped the city before the bridges and tunnels had closed down into their country homes. And I just remember thinking, wow, that's so, 2001, or because like when my grandmother ran away from the Cossacks, she didn't go to East Hampton to a mansion on the beach. And I thought it kind of perfectly encapsulated what happens to us now when we go to war. And my characters ended up at the Barefoot Contessa, which is no longer here. So yeah, I think I was just overwhelmed by that. With this book, I'm a really late adapter, and I'm really a Luddite, and it takes a long time for me to know what's going on, especially with technology. But I think it was around 2003 that I kind of woke up to the fact that privacy was sort of gone and irretrievable. And it started with, I got an email in my inbox from a friend, and it was a photo of a bridesmaid at a wedding, and she was wearing a strapless gown. She was sort of joyously reaching for the bouquet, and her breasts had popped out of the gown. And this became, I guess, what was a meme? Is that what you call it? It became this internet sensation, and it ended up in my inbox, except I didn't know her, and I didn't know anybody in the wedding, and I thought, I was absolutely horrified. I was just, like, my heart went out to this woman. I just thought, this is the kind of thing in your own life that your best friend says, nobody saw, here's a glass of wine, just dance, and you try to forget it. But now it was in a zillion inboxes, and never to be expunged. And that whole idea of that sort of the hugeness of the internet and where it was taking us and what it meant for our lives and what it meant for the divide between parents and kids, and really struck me. And I had other things I was thinking about. I was thinking about, again, this whole thing with money, because I just think that's the issue of our time. And I was thinking about women and sex roles, and women who work and women who don't, and the commodification and early sexualization of young girls, and so a lot of stuff. But there were a bunch of incidents in the city, in the schools, where kids were sent things to each other and they'd blown up. And so it gave me a story and a skeleton, gave me the bones for I could lay down all the ideas that I had, sort of the meat and the fur. But it was problematic for just the reason you're saying, which was it's really hard to try to write about, to surf the zeitgeist. And as I was going, I realized I didn't know how significant any of this was, because the mores were changing, and the ubiquity of these events, which, and I was like, how big will this be for him and for them? So then I decided to set it back in 2003 when I woke up. So it's actually, I think of it as a historical novel.
I just finished the book today, so I was really friends with Julie, and she said, you were coming. I was like, I'm just reading that book right
Oh, that's funny.
So I made sure I finished it by today. So my question is kind of connected to that question. The weaving that you do with all the characters, and it's an omniscient narrator, pretty much, right? I mean, you're going in and out of everyone's head, almost. I'm wondering how if you outlined it first, did you write it continuously? Did you do one part and then go to another? How did it come out?
How did it evolve?
Yeah.
You know, it evolved through a lot of trial and error. What it really is, I think of as an omniscient, well, not an omniscient, like a close personal third. So that when I first conceived of it, well, first I started writing the mom. Mm-hmm. And then I thought it would be the mother, the son. This is their perspectives. The father, the son, the mother. So I had a little form for myself, and if I don't give myself rules, I fall apart. Mm-hmm. So that was the rule.
Yeah, that's very...
And then as I was writing her section, I realized that you needed to know what was going to happen a little bit. Her section is all about a party, and I needed some preparation, so I wrote that prologue that I read to you. And then when I finished, I thought, oh, Daisy, the girl, never got her say, even though she's the heart of the book. So I gave her a little epilogue. She's a coda. So I ended up with 7 sections. And then when my editor came along, she said, the father, we don't have enough of him, we don't really get him, so you need to put in like a little sliver of him here. And I was like, no, I can't do that. The rule is the 5. There's this and this, and it'll wreck everything. And we kind of got to a standstill. And she said, well, just try it. So I put in this little sliver, and then I thought, wow, that last section, that can be a dialogue between them. So it actually goes from Richard's point of view to Liz, that's the father, Liz is the mother, back and forth, and back. And there's really only one scene that's a true third person, and that's this huge fight they have where they just, those fights that you never get over. And that's like everybody's point of view. But that's only a few pages. So that's how it evolved. But I just find that sometimes I kind of arbitrarily make up these rules just so I have them. And then it gives me form, and it kind of girds me as I go along. Actually, I remember talking to you about this, Ursula Breadlove, because the day at the beach, it's 24 hours. It's the 24 hours of 9/11. And it couldn't be longer, and I couldn't be sure, because I decided it was 24 hours. And so I had, in that book, I had real benchmarks, because it was a real day. And so whatever they turned on the radio, what they heard at 2 o'clock was really what you would have heard, you know. So I did a huge amount of crazy, insane OCD research for that. But it helped me to write it because I had benchmarks during the day I had to meet.
Thank you.
Go ahead.
What was the process of discovering and occupying the Jay character like for you?
You know, people ask me that a lot. He was the easiest one to write. Yeah. He flew out of me. I didn't know if I had a book or not, even when I finished the Liz section. And then I started to write from his point of view, and then I thought, oh, you have a book. And it may be that one point in my life I really studied 15-year-old boys, and I took a lot of notes. I don't know, but he, you know, he was easy. She who, you know, she's younger than I am, and there's a lot of things about her that are different, but, you know, she's a mom of 2 kids, and she has long hair, and I do have long hair. You'd think that she was easier.
Yeah.
But she really wasn't. She was the toughest one for me to write.
Yeah.
Anything else?
Why was she the toughest for you to write?
You know why? I think because I wanted to have sympathy for her, but I also wanted her to make terrible decisions.
Yeah.
And there's, you know, she's both like just a lioness of a mother and Lady Macbeth, and she gives in to her own weaknesses too easily, but she's also the character I think that grows the most, and at the end has the most chance at a life. She just wakes up late.
Yeah.
So she was hard because she does stuff that I thought she shouldn't do, but then I guess I do things I think I should do. You know, I mean, everybody does, and that's what makes people interesting. And certainly characters have to screw up, or there's no point in being about them. So, yeah?
The part about the girl walking away from all men and how she can't wait to grow old and no one will want to sleep with her. I'm wondering, because like sections like that, when I hear that, I always feel like it was a thought that was had beforehand, and you get really excited to have a character to put into her mouth, or if it was one of those moments where it just sort of flowed out and it hadn't occurred like in a fully formed idea. I don't know.
You mean, where did it come from? Is that what you're asking?
Sort
or
of.
was it predetermined that I try to find a place to put
Was
it
it
in?
exciting to have found a place to put that, or was it something that came out and was surprising?
Interesting. She, you know, in a way for me, she's the moral center of the book, and I think she's the most integrated character and the most wise of all of them. And I think she became, you know, I have pretty strong feelings about how sexualized girls are and how hard it is for them. And I think that Audrey is so beautiful that she just became, you know, these boys just wanted to be with her. And she knew that her power lay in a place that didn't have anything to do with her value. And she resented it. And she had real compassion for Daisy, and I think she understood what Daisy did, which clearly nobody should do because it makes you so vulnerable and for lots of reasons, but came out of a place of Daisy that had courage and wanted to connect and wanted love, and this was how she'd been taught women get that. So it was extreme, and she was a very deprived girl, even though she's a very wealthy girl. And I think Audrey understood all of that. So yeah, maybe I was excited to write it.
And the other part of that question, I was wondering, like, when you say something that feels good to write and feels like a nice, complete thought, then you mention it again when you say her name when he's in the therapist's office, Audrey, who walked away from everyone who did that. Like, I wonder what goes on in your mind about balance there. Like, I said this once, should I say it again? Is it too much? Was it not enough the first time? So
you know, you sit there and you think, am I hitting it too hard over the head? Or is it, as you say, am I so excited about it, I want it there again? And then you got to weigh it. And then your editor weighs it. And other people weigh it. I think there's huge value in repetition. I mean, obviously you don't want to just hammer people into the ground, but I think there is even value in the music of repetition and the rhythm, and that, you know, you know how writing has a hum? Like when you get it right, there's a hum and you can hear it. And there's like background music to every book and story. And so sometimes I just feel like I'm putting it in to get in the right beats, just for the sound. And I'm tone deaf, so I don't know what I'm talking about, but I can hear it when I'm writing.
thanks.
How about Richard? I mean, did you try to make him despicable?
To make Rachel despicable?
No, not Rachel. Richard.
Richard. Oh, I'm sorry if you find him despicable. I think
I had a hard time having anything to do for him.
I think he's a very conflicted guy, you know.
Yeah.
I think I'm sure, you know, I'm 50 and I grew up, I was a teenager in the 70s, and I just remember all my friends' mothers, like, a lot of them were divorced or widowed or whatever and not terribly educated, and they just smoked and say, you girls better get a career. You better be able to take care of yourselves because look what happened to me, you know? And I took that totally to heart. And then I grew up and I met all these affluent people where the women didn't work, even though they were really highly trained, and some of them were my kid's PA president was a microbiologist, and the head of the chess club was an engineer from MIT with an MBA from Harvard. I mean, they had all these credentials, you know, and but the dads never said, oh, maybe I should, you know, I wonder if I want to be home with the kids, or I want to work, or, you know, I want to follow my bliss. Like, they were so in this driven, and this is part of this pre-2008, you know, rush for greed that I saw in the country and in the elite. And I just thought they were in a vice. And I think in some ways Richard's in a vice. And I think, I don't know, I hope that in the scene where he looks at Daisy's video, you see some of his own inner turmoil and anguish. I also think, you know, he's a guy who's been trying to ride a very fine line between doing good and making a lot of money. And he's not quite sure how to ride that. And he's got a lot of ego into all of that.
Well, that's the part that I know.
That you don't like?
No.
Yeah.
Being honest.
You know, I mean, it's like, I hope that you feel compassion for the characters, but my job isn't to make you like them.
No, I know.
Yeah, no, I'm just saying, so as a writer, it's like, yeah, they do, as I said, they do things that are despicable. I mean, these parents do things that are despicable. You know, and then of
Especially
course,
him. I just found it. Enough said, I'm sorry.
That's okay. Anything else?
I have
Oh, sorry, I didn't see you.
I picked up, well, I haven't read this yet, but I picked up your book, P.S., and on the front cover it says, fantastic, a fresh and funny love story that slows down only during the delicious sex scenes so that you may better relish them. And writing sex scenes are so difficult. So you had a sex scene in this one that was very successful. So can you give us some observations of things you've come to understand about writing a successful sex scene?
You know, I think in most of my books there are one or two really significant sex scenes, and I think because they reveal something about the characters, I try to write them honestly. You know, I think the scene that I read, I hope, and you can tell me later if you totally disagree, that it's realistic. You know, that the girl would be on her knees in the grass behind school, that a boy would lose control, that she would want to be subjugated. You know, I think that what transpires between them before, I wanted it to feel real. So I guess the one thing that usually is I try not to do in sex scenes is ever be sentimental. They're not usually in my books, honestly, they're not usually about love. They're usually about other things, and maybe that's part of what keeps them from being, it's so hard to write about physical love, though I think Scott Spencer does an awfully good job, well, at least physical obsession and endless love, which is a terrible movie, but it's a really fantastic book and great about sex. I mean, those are great sex scenes, or Salt, or and Sport and Pastime. And those are great books to read about sex. But I think it's the warts and all thing that makes it feel real. Does that help?
Thank you, yes.
Yeah. Anything else? Now I feel like a dirty book writer. Somebody ask one more question about something else, and then I'll go away.
One more
yeah.
question.
Okay.
This thing you said earlier, oh, that's when I knew I had a book. What is that? Can you talk a little bit about the feeling of having a book? What is that?
It feels really good because it's like I'm now not just spent 2 years on not having a book. You know what I mean? Like writing a novel it's such a suspension of belief. Is that or disbelief? I don't remember. It's you're so suspended, right? You're by yourself and nobody else knows about it, and you have to kind of justify the fact that you're spending a good part of your life doing this, and you have to have hope that it will suddenly take shape and form and you'll figure it out, and sometimes you don't. I've had that happen. Or sometimes you find out, like my first novel, I wrote 150 pages and I gave it to, and I was young and I gave it to my agent, and he's like, you're just writing around what you want to write about. And I was so, of course, devastated. And then I thought, oh, this is so great because he was so right, and I threw it all out. It was like the best thing that ever happened. But I've had things where, you just keep working and working, and it never quite gets that center. So that feeling is great because then you think, okay, no matter what, I'll find a way to make it become a whole because I love this boy. I'm going to kill this boy. I love this boy so much, but I'm going to put him through such horrible paces that there's going to be a story, but I can embody him. So that was a great feeling. It doesn't mean that there weren't then years and years of worrying the whole thing, because there were.
How many years?
I stopped counting because counting doesn't help me. I decided counting pages, years, books, whatever. I try not to keep track, but I started thinking about it when I was writing A Day at the Beach, and I had a hard time selling A Day at the Beach, so I probably started this and then went back and rewrote A Day at the Beach. It was not a painful thing. And that came out in 2007, so this is 4 years later. So, it took a while. definitely took a while. Okay, you're free. Thank you.
Thank you.
It was a pleasure. Thanks.
Oh, that was great. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.